Okay, so let's get started so that we don't take up too much of your time. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. As we already said, this is a repeat of the session that we ran a couple of weeks ago. So my name is Laura Newman. For those of you that don't know, I am the Library Education and Partnerships Manager, and I am responsible for arranging these this sort of suite of training sessions that we run every summer for our partners. And today's session is being run by Melissa. So I will pass over to Melissa and let her introduce herself.
Thanks, Laura. Hi, everybody. So my name's Melissa, and as Laura mentioned, this is a repeat of the session that happened 2 weeks ago. So if you were here for that, this is going to be exactly the same content. So that's just a warning. But if you are here for a second time, welcome back. Otherwise, nice to meet you all. I'm going to be sharing some slides with you now, and we're going to do some demonstrations and things. So I'll be flicking between screens. If you have a question or would like me to repeat something or slow down, anything like that, please feel free to either pop it into the chat and Laura will let me know because I might miss it because I'll be looking at my slides, or do feel free to take yourself off mute and let me know. Okay, so I'm going to get started now. Let me just share my screen with you. Are we recording, Laura, now?
Yes, it is already recording.
Great, okay. As you know, this is a session that is focused on supporting your students with research skills, and we're going to include discussion about how you can use generative AI. So my role is at Greenwich. I'm an academic services librarian. My specific responsibility is for the business school, so I support business school students, but this session is going to be a relatively general session that will apply to any subject that you happen to teach. Before we kind of get started into the presentation, I wondered if I could just get you to type into the chat what subjects you are currently teaching, just so that I can get an idea of who we have in this session at the moment. Do any of you teach business? Are you teaching computing? If you could just let me know in the chat, that would be really lovely to see. I'll just give you a few seconds to do that. So while we're waiting for things to pop up in the chat, just to go over the agenda for today. So it's going to be probably about an hour and a half session. There will be some things that you'll need to use AI for. I'll show you how to log into Microsoft Copilot. I think if you've already attended Jimmy's session, you might have already practiced this before, but you will need to use your Greenwich login for that. But don't worry about that for now. I can see that most of you are logged in, not with your Greenwich logins to this Teams meeting. So just be aware that when we get to the AI part, if you can remember what your Greenwich login is, that would be really useful. Okay, yeah, so we've got a couple of business, accounting and auditing. Great. Okay, so you are teaching in the kind of area that I'm responsible for in the library, and maybe we'll cross paths at some stage in the future. So today's session, we're going to start off by looking at what the students' research needs are, because I thought that it might be useful for you to know what we as librarians are being asked on a daily basis by students. Now, I know that as lecturers, you're not going to have as much time as we do as librarians to kind of get into the sort of detail about information literacy that we would normally do. But I thought, you probably are going to be asked some of these questions by students, so it might be useful for you to know how we deal with that in the library. So we're going to look at how what the library resources are that are available for your students to use, and how we tend to help students to search for articles. So obviously there's a lot of material that students will be using. So for example, in business, they might be using financial information. I'm not going to focus on specific resources today. We're just going to look at looking for journal articles, but I will show you some guides for the different subjects that we teach at Greenwich that will have that more specific information that you can look at later. And then we're going to have an introduction to generative AI for literature searching, talk a little bit about academic referencing, and then there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end. But of course, if you have a question throughout the session, as I say, do feel free to interrupt me if you want to ask it. Okay, so as I said, we're going to start by looking at what it is that our students are asking for help with. So when they come to the library, what are they asking us for support with? So we do one-to-ones as librarians, and the students book our one-to-ones using a system where they have to write down what questions they have before they meet with us. So I've just taken a few recent quotes just to give you a flavour of the kinds of information literacy questions that students have at the moment, just so you can so we can set the scene, I guess. So a student said to me, I have been struggling to find relevant academic papers. So this is something that we encounter a lot because students are using, they're surrounded by information, they've got their phones available, they've got Google, they've got AI, but what they struggle to find are papers that are really, or academic articles that are actually relevant to the subject that they're studying. They're often kind of drowning in information. So how do they find papers that are relevant to their studies? This student said, I would appreciate guidance on how to properly reference sources and how to find credible materials related to my assignment topics. So this issue of credibility, again, kind of relates back to all the information overload that students are experiencing, where not only are they trying to find papers that match their topic, but they're trying to find articles that are actually credible, that are true, that they can trust, that is reliable research. They don't know where to find those. And of course, referencing is an academic skill that students generally don't know how to do when they start university. And so this is something that we need to help them learn how to do. The student said, despite thoroughly searching all available university library resources, I have yet to locate suitable literature. My professor mentioned that such papers do exist, so I suspect I must be missing something in my search strategy. Again, this is really common because the students often know where the library catalogue is, but actually how to use it, again, is a skill that needs to be taught. So as we'll talk about in more detail, using the university library catalogues is quite different from using something like Google or ChatGPT, and often they aren't necessarily searching in the best possible way to try and find relevant material. So again, this is something that we need to teach them to do, and we're going to cover that in the session, how to search using the library catalogues. And finally, this student had said, I would like to understand how I can effectively and ethically use AI tools to enhance the quality of my assignments and achieve better academic results. So this student realises that AI is available for them to use. At the University of Greenwich, we do encourage students to explore using AI, but this student was aware that there were boundaries around that, and they wanted to make sure that they weren't using AI in a way that overstepped those boundaries. Again, something that they're not going to necessarily know and that we need to teach them. So this was just to give you an idea. These quotes all come from the last couple of months, students that I've seen. This is the kind of questions that they're coming to us with. So in terms of the support that I provide and my colleagues as academic services librarians, what we tend to notice is that students who are moving from reading lists, so lists that you've put together, telling them what to read, when they're moving from that to independent research, this can seem very overwhelming to them. Again, it's this concept of information overload. Many students don't know how to start researching. They're kind of at a loss to know how to begin. And as I said, academic databases that we're going to look at today, they work very differently to generative AI and search engines like Google. So that kind of tension between the different ways of searching can come up. And so we need to help them, guide them through that. And as I've already said, the evaluation of literature, so working out what's credible and trustworthy and appropriate to use in an assignment, and also academic conventions like referencing. These things aren't necessarily self-evident. They're not something that students will, show up at university necessarily knowing how to do. So these are all the sorts of things that we might guide them through in our roles as librarians. So when I teach embedded sessions, so I go into modules and often teach workshops for various different subjects. usually the student, in my opinion, the students need a bit of context as to why I'm there. Because as I said, students are surrounded, as we know, by information. They're looking at their phones all the time. They're getting news from TikTok. They're using generative AI. Why do they need to know how to use the library? Why do they need to bother to learn the skills required to use an academic database? So in order for me to kind of impress upon them the importance of this, I usually try to provide context before I begin my sessions. Why does it matter if they use quality academics resources? And one of the ways that I tend to find that this is quite a useful discussion to have about is to present them with a Mentimeter question. So you might have used Mentimeter before. If not, this is an interactive kind of digital education tool that the students can access on their phone. I often pose a question like this: have you ever encountered fake or unreliable information sources online? And I get the students to respond to that at the beginning of the session. The main purpose of a question like this is just to get them thinking about the information environment that they're working in, to understand that there might be issues around trustworthiness, reliability, mis and disinformation. And obviously it depends on the kind of level of the student as to, how in depth they need to really think about this. A level 4 student probably doesn't need to know too much more other than, we do need to have some sort of quality control on the material we're using in our assignments. Whereas postgraduate level, dissertation students, etc., might want to be thinking a little bit more about, using specific databases to find their material. But a question like this just gets the students thinking about why it is that we're asking them to use academic resources rather than just going on the internet and finding the first thing that pops up on Google, for example. It's not a way to pass judgment on the student for using Google, but it's just to get them in that kind of mode. So you can see that with this particular exercise in this class, 7 students said that they have encountered unreliable information and they realised straight away. 8 students said that they have encountered unreliable information online, but they didn't realise until later. And 2 students said that they've never encountered that sort of information before, which is probably untrue. They probably haven't realised. The middle option, yes, and I didn't realise until later, is something that is growing, is a growing issue, right? So in this kind of age of AI, it's difficult necessarily to tell or to work out what you're seeing online, whether or not it's reliable and whether or not it's trustworthy. So this is something that we try to tell the students. We're not saying don't use Google, we're not saying don't use ChatGPT, but they do need to be aware that this could potentially be an issue. And so this is where we can emphasize the value of them using the academic databases that the university provides. So in the United Kingdom anyway, and probably for most of the world, I would say Google is the default search engine that people are using due to the familiarity. But we know that when students or when we are using this search engine ourselves, the number of results we see can be overwhelming. Whereas if they're using academic databases, it's a much more controlled search. They tend not to have that kind of information overload. I also talk usually in my sessions about how the library databases have actually been selected by lecturers and librarians. So people who are experts in a particular subject field, who are trained to kind of evaluate information sources to make sure they're high quality and trustworthy. So if students are using these databases, then they don't need to worry so much about trying to do this evaluation for themselves. And I also often talk about the fact that these databases are actually quite expensive. They're paid for by the university. So we don't really, we're not currently in the age of, academic information being freely available to the general public, unfortunately. Obviously, there is that open access movement, which, continues to grow. But on the whole, a lot of material is still behind a paywall. So they do need their university credentials to log into the catalogues in order to access that high quality material. So I usually sort of say to them, this is your chance to, use your privileges as a student to access that high quality material. So that's usually how I start my sessions, just to kind of encourage them away from using things like Google and move them towards using the academic databases that we provide. I just wondered if I could hear from you, if you wouldn't mind typing into the chat, when you do your own research, where do you normally search for articles? Where do you tend to begin when you search? There's obviously no judgment on this. I'm just curious to know from your perspective where you tend to start searching when you're looking for academic material. Do you tend to use Google, or do you use academic databases, AI? Where do you tend to begin? Google Scholar, yeah, I would say that is very common, and I usually also start at Google Scholar. Again, it's that familiarity, isn't it? It's the way that you can search Google Scholar using natural language. It's a good place to begin. Anybody else? Google Scholar, online databases, deep research of AI in some cases. So yeah, you use a mixture. And I think this is what I'm trying to get at. Like if we're using these different tools to search, then our students definitely are. Some library databases as well. That's great. I think the issue that this highlights though is that each of these different tools that you've mentioned requires a different way in which to search them effectively. So we kind of need to know where our students are searching in order to kind of help support them to get the best out of those different tools. So what about the University of Greenwich Online Library? So if we just kind of move away from the idea of using Google Scholar for a bit and talk about what it is that our students have access to if they use the online library, we're going to look at two different tools today that your students will have access to. The first one is Library Search Digital Resources. And this is kind of like, it's almost like Greenwich's Google, I suppose, because it searches across all of the subscribed databases that Greenwich has. If you want to look for articles, it's one of the best places to start. Unlike Google Scholar, if you use Library Search Digital Resources, you won't get that overwhelming number of results. You have more control over the search, as we'll see in a second. And then the second place that I'm going to briefly show you is the LibGuides. So that means library guides. The subject librarians, so as I said, I'm the subject librarian for business. There's subject librarians for, all the different subjects we teach here. We've put together separate guides for each of those subjects so that students can go there to find material relevant to their subject area, so industry material as well as academic articles. So what I am going to do is just stop sharing now actually, and show you where students can find these two tools. There'll be a little bit of flicking around as I share screens with you. And also I'm aware that you might not be able to log into these systems. So, and also that the systems that your students will see is slightly different from what I'm seeing, but hopefully we'll be able to, hopefully this will be helpful anyway, just so that you can see where you can direct your students to go. So basically, I think your students will just see this section in the student portal. So when they've logged into the Greenwich student portal, they'll see a cut down version of what I can see here, and they can see this section in the middle, search the library, and this section, library support. So this is the place that they need to go when they're looking for the library search tools. So library search, which I mentioned to start with, which is kind of the tool that searches across all of the databases, is this link here, Library Search Digital Resources. So we're going to use this to search for articles. And the other one is the LibGuides, which means library guides. When students click on that link, they will have access to this box that says subject guides, where they can select the subject. So for example, this is the guide I put together for the business school. And you'll see that in the subject guide, then they will have access to resources that are relevant specifically to their subject area. So for business, they might want to access financial data or market industry reports, etc. So obviously, if they're doing something else, like let's say computing, it'll be a different guide with subject databases that are relevant to that subject area. So this is the subject guide for computer science. So those are the two main places to search for articles. So that's what we're going to do now. So I'm going to show you, first of all, how to do the sort of traditional searching using the library catalogues when we look for articles. And then we're going to look at generative AI and how that can help us with literature searching. So let me just come back to my slides. So you'll have access to these slides later, and this is just a slide that will tell you again a little bit about what those two tools are and what they're most useful for. Okay, so we're going to move on to how we teach students to search for journal articles in databases. And the thing that I've mentioned a few times already that is difficult for students is the fact that academic databases don't work like generative AI. You can't talk to it naturally. So whereas a student might have an assignment topic or a question and they can type that into ChatGPT as a normal question, they can't do that with an academic database. They need to use keywords in order to search an academic database. So this is kind of often the first hurdle that students need to overcome in order to know how to use our library systems properly. And it can be a difficult one to explain. So when I'm teaching the sort of topic of searching a database, I usually have an example for the students to look at, and I ask them to identify what they think the main keywords are in that topic that we could use to search a database. So for example, again, this is a Mentimeter activity, so they can access this activity on their phone, and I'll ask them a question like, or I'll give them a topic such as discuss the impact of employee engagement on organisational performance. And I ask the students, if this was your question, if this was your assignment topic, what do you think the major keywords are in this question, which we could use to search databases to find academic material on the topic? So you can see that this is obviously a real example that I used in a class. You can see what the students responded. Some of them understood what I meant. So some of them understood that, the major keywords that there are around employee engagement and organisational performance. But you can see that some students didn't really understand and they've put full sentences in. So again, it's getting past that hurdle of understanding when you're searching an academic database, you have to really focus on only the main keywords, which we're going to combine to do that kind of literature search. So I'm going to show you how I would demonstrate the search to students now using this topic. And I wondered if you would type into the chat for me the major keywords in this topic. How does well-being affect university students' academic performance? If we were going to look for academic articles on this topic, what do you think the main keywords are that we would search for? Just write that into the chat for me, and then I'm going to use those to show you how we would search library search. Okay, academic performance. Yep, definitely. That is one major keyword or search term that we'll be looking for. Anything else? If we just typed academic performance into library search, we'd be getting a lot of articles that weren't necessarily relevant to the topic. So what other words would we need to use to search? Yep, so academic performance again. What else? Academic performance of who? So well-being, yep. So we're going to be searching for the concept of how well-being affects academic performance for who? What's the final kind of major search term that we need to look for? Yeah, so the whole question, that's right, that's an easier way to search. That won't work if we're using an academic database. So well-being and academic performance of students. Okay, let's give that last one that Tim's put in, well-being and academic performance of students, a go. And I'll show you what I mean about not using the whole sentence if you're looking within an academic database. So I'm going to stop sharing again. And I think what we've identified here is the stumbling block for many students as well. So we're going to have a look. Let me just close this down so we can start from the beginning. We're going to have a look at library search, okay? So we click on library search and then digital resources. We get a search box that is similar to Google. Now, if I typed in that whole question, how does well-being affect the academic performance of university students, we would get a lot of irrelevant results. When students are searching an academic tool like our library catalogue, they need to be far more precise. Okay, so that's why they need to boil it down to the keywords, the major keywords. And then to search for those, the easiest way to do it is on any kind of literature searching database. If you click on advanced search, you get these extra boxes, which is where we're going to combine those keywords. So if I just typed in academic performance and searched, let me just show you an example. If we just use that one keyword, we get 15,000 results. Okay, so that's far too broad. Hardly any of these results are going to relate to our topic. This is why we need to be more precise. So what we need to do instead is type in those other three keywords. So well-being, we're looking at how well-being affects the academic performance of university students. And so this is how you search any kind of literature database, not just the library search tool that Greenwich offers. Okay, so we'll have a look at this in a database, another database in a second. But what this search tool is going to do is look across all of the literature databases, regardless of subject, to find articles on the topic of academic performance and well-being in university students. So if I click search, I've got 195,000 results. Now, the reason for that is because there's also another quite crucial thing that I didn't do when I did my search initially. So if we go back, if the search term is more than one word, like academic performance, we need to put these in quotes. Now, if you have used Google, you might have done this as well because this works with Google also. What these quotes do is tell the database, I'm looking for academic performance as one search term. I'm not looking for the word academic and the word performance separately. And same with university students. I want the catalogue, this library search to realise that this is a whole search term. It's not individual words that I'm looking for. So if I click search now, then we have far fewer results. We've got 26,000 because we've just been a bit more precise about our search. Now, obviously, that's still a lot of results. That's because our topic is quite broad. But what I wanted to show you with library search that's really useful is if you want your students to look for peer-reviewed academic journals, it's really easy to show them how to filter these results down to focus on that particular source. So you'll see up the top of the screen here, source type, you can select academic journals because the results here are a lot of different kinds of material. It could be newspapers, it could be ebooks, all sorts of things. But if you just want them to look for academic journals, they can select that option, click apply, and click peer reviewed as well. And you can see that as you select these filters, this number of results will go down. Now, the results would go down further if we made our topic even more specific, but we'll leave that for now. This is just to give you an idea of how to search a tool like this. So once you've done that, then the students can scroll down and have a look at the results, and they can decide whether or not, they want to read the article. So for example, if they want to read this one, they can click on Full Text Finder. It's just redirecting us, hopefully, to the journal. Oh, just need to log in. So you can see what I mean about the fact that a lot of academic material is not open access. It does require the student to log into the student portal in order to access it through our catalogues. Okay, and so it has now taken us to that article there. So basically, the student will then need to, make a judgment about which of these articles is useful to them or not. This, again, is where we can help them kind of make decisions about, the relevance of an article. So if I just go back to our original search, just to recap. So what we did there was we identified the important keywords in our topic, and then we put them into these search boxes. When there was more than one word in the search term, we used quote marks. With wellbeing, we didn't, because there was just one word, and then we clicked search. Now, this technique can be utilised in any literature database, as I mentioned. So, for example, if I go to the Greenwich Business School subject guide just to access a journal database that's specific to business, so say we chose ABI Inform Global, if you wanted students to use a specific database like this or like JSTOR, etc., most of the journal databases will have that same kind of functionality of clicking on and you can type in your keywords. And the difference between this and library search is that because we're looking at a business database, it will mainly focus on business material, and that will be the same if you look at a computing database, etc. But I just want to show you that essentially the technique of searching by keyword is the same regardless of the literature database you're using. So you can see that now we've only got 10 results, and that's because we're looking at a much more specific database. This one is to do with business, and the articles that you see will be more geared towards the topic of business. Does anybody have any questions about searching for articles using keywords? You have all done this kind of search before for your own research, but you can see why, given the way that we search these days with Google, with GenAI, etc., that this can be quite a new technique, I suppose, for many students. So it's something that they will need to learn. But at the same time, we're going to move on. So this is what I mentioned earlier, is that, students are likely going to be using quite a lot of different types of systems to search for literature. So I often start by teaching them how to search in the traditional way before I move on to kind of the newer ways of searching, because it's useful for them to know that they will still need to know how to use our library catalogues. And the reason for this...
Melissa?
Yeah.
Sorry, can I just jump in quickly? So just to say, part of the reason for this session is obviously that you all see your students all the time, and far more than we ever do, which is why we think it's helpful to give you these sessions so that you can understand how to help them. But that is not to say that we are expecting you to do all of it. So if you do feel like your students need some more support in accessing the University of Greenwich Library resources, for example, or in their research skills, then our team is very happy to support you in doing that. So Melissa would be happy to run an online session, just dropping you in it there, Melissa.
No, yeah.
Or any of the rest of our team who support different subjects with your students, so we can run a live session or provide a video if you think that would be helpful. So that's just a reminder that although we are helping you to kind of understand it better, don't feel like you are on your own with this. And if you do think your students need some support in this area, then please do get in touch with us, and we would be very happy to arrange something to support them.
Yeah, so I mean, basically this is just a bit of a taster of the kinds of stuff that we do with students. But as Laura said, I'm more than happy to provide videos of, for example, that keyword searching that we just did. But moving on to literature searching and generative AI, this is becoming increasingly more important for us to understand and to get a handle on ourselves. generative AI is also becoming more and more useful for literature searching. You know, it wasn't that long ago that you would find, if you put a prompt into ChatGPT, that you wouldn't necessarily get anything particularly, or you would find a lot of hallucinations, and that is definitely improved rapidly over time. But there are some things to remember about this. So unlike what we just looked at with keyword searching, where if you gave students those same keywords and everybody looked in library search, everybody would get the same results. With generative AI, it really depends on the tool that the student's choosing to use. So if they're using ChatGPT, or if they're using Microsoft Copilot, or if they're using Perplexity, everybody's going to get a different result, even if they put in the same prompt. And, you know, I think you might have talked about prompting in an earlier session on how, you know, you get information from generative AI. So even if people have used the same prompt in the same tool, they'll often get different results. So it's just a little bit more difficult to predict what the students will get. So this is where it's important to help guide them around, you know, ideas around evaluating information online, making sure that what they're using isn't misinformation and is trustworthy. So when I'm introducing generative AI for literature searching to students, I usually point them in the direction of the University of Greenwich AI policy. This is, I think, a video, and it is usually quite helpful for students to spend some time with that on their own to get their heads around, you know, what they are and aren't allowed to do. Because of course we do encourage students to explore using generative AI, particularly in some subjects like business. You know, it's being integrated into their assignments now. So it's not like we don't want them to use it, but of course we don't want them to be using it to write their assignments. So they do need to understand what they are and aren't allowed to do. The University of Greenwich approved tool, as you probably know, is Microsoft Copilot. And I'm going to be asking you to do an activity in a second that uses Microsoft Copilot. So I'm just going to give you a couple of seconds now to open Copilot on your own computers. So if you don't know how to do that, probably the easiest way to do it, I would say, is to go to office.com, microsoftoffice.com, and log in using your Greenwich credentials. Because again, the subscribed version of Copilot is different to the non-subscribed one. So the one you log into with your Greenwich credentials will have, you know, more kind of functionality than if you just use the free version. So if anybody has difficulty logging into Copilot, let me know. I'm going to log into Copilot at my end now, so you can just watch how I do it, and then we'll carry on with the presentation. So let me just stop presenting, and I'm going to share my screen and log into Copilot myself. So I have to close all these windows down. Okay, so I usually go to office.com, and then I can sign in with my University of Greenwich credentials. I've actually already signed in, so that's taken me directly in, and then I'm in Copilot chat. I also have it bookmarked here, so you might also have it bookmarked. You can also just Google Microsoft Copilot and log in that way. But do let me know if you have any problems with that. If you have logged into Copilot, sorry.
Sorry, Melissa, I was just going to say, is there an alternative if people don't have a Greenwich login or don't remember their Greenwich login?
Yeah, sorry, I should say, if you don't have a Greenwich login or can't remember it, then feel free actually to pick an AI tool of your choice. So if you'd prefer to use ChatGPT, Perplexity, or any other AI tool that you generally use in your life, then you can use that one as well, and that would be interesting to get that contrast. But once you've accessed some Gen AI tool, please can you put something in the chat, like yes or Y for yes, something like that, so that I know that you're all ready and we can move on with the next bit. Okay, thanks, Tim. Anybody else? I can get one more person to let me know that they've logged into something, then we will move on.
So you can put your thumbs up or unmute if it's easier. I know sometimes it's harder to access the chat when you are not using a Greenwich login, but you should be able to raise your hand in the top toolbar or something. And like Melissa said, you can just use any tool. It doesn't have to be Copilot. So you could just type into your internet browser, ChatGPT, or any other tool that is available, because we're not just promoting that.
Okay, I'll give you a few more seconds and then I will move on. Hopefully some of you have managed to do that now. We're going to move on now. So just to reiterate why, you know, how we can use these tools for literature searching. We're going to have a practice with it in a minute, but these are some of the things that you need to remember if you are supporting students with using it. We obviously encourage students to reference anything that they include in their assignments. So, you know, if they put in quotes or ideas, etc., they need to attribute that to the original source. So sometimes when you're using something like Copilot or ChatGPT, it'll just come out in a block of text and it can be unclear as to where the original information came from. So it can be difficult for students to know what to reference. Now, of course, as we know, things have improved over time, and a lot of these tools have a little link button next to the statement that the student can click on, and it will take it back to the original source where the AI tool has got that information from. So we need to encourage students to check the link to go back to the source and figure out where it came from. The other thing is the AI, I don't know if anybody else has noticed this, but it tends to have more sort of positive or affirmative tendencies, like it will sort of agree with everything that you say, or say, oh, that was a really good question, you know, kind of in a more positive way. It's not neutral. So students, you know, when they're writing a literature review, we're asking them to be critical. So we want to make sure that they're actually getting information that covers both sides, or, you know, lots of different sides of an argument. So we don't want them necessarily to go down this rabbit hole of having everything that they say be affirmed. They should be approaching the results that ChatGPT or Copilot gives them critically. Okay, so this ties back to the original question, the Mentimeter question I asked them, where I said, have you ever encountered, you know, fake information online? And some of them were unsure. Some of them said that they didn't know that it was fake until later. This is why they need to approach these sorts of results critically. Check the source. Where does it come from? Does the person who wrote it have the authority to say what they've said? And of course, hallucinations still occur. So this is when the AI tool essentially makes up information. But again, because it has that kind of affirmative, confident tone in the results, sometimes it can be difficult to tell that what is being said isn't actually true. So again, you know, I've said it before, but I'll say it again, make sure that the students are checking the link next to the statement so they can go back to the source. And they can always use library search, which we just used to search for articles, to confirm that the article that the AI tool has told them about actually exists. I do still see students showing me lists of references that they've generated on AI, and they can't figure out how to find them. And that's because they don't exist. The AI tool has literally made up quite plausible sounding journal articles. But the easy way the student can check to see if it's real is to go back to the library catalogue and check that article against the catalogue, or Google Scholar or something like that, to make sure that it actually exists. So an example of a hallucination that happened earlier this year, this was a newspaper that the Chicago Sun-Times, that was quite critical of AI a couple of years ago. So they were writing articles where they were saying that AI is no substitute for human intelligence. So this newspaper took a fairly negative view of things like ChatGPT. However, earlier this year, it was discovered that the book reviewer for the summer had produced a supplement for the newspaper recommending books to its readers, none of them were real. Okay, they'd used ChatGPT to create that list of books. Now, you wouldn't necessarily think that would be something that this newspaper would do, given its critical stance originally on AI, but it just shows, that these things are still occurring, and we do need to be aware that we need to, be quite savvy about evaluating the information that we find online, because these things are still occurring. So how can we use generative AI as a search assistant? Well, one useful way is to, if a student doesn't necessarily understand the topic or the assignment they've been given, they can ask the, ChatGPT or Microsoft Copilot to unpack the question, figure out what the important concepts are in that question, give them ideas to research. This goes back to what we just did, where we identified the keywords in that topic. So what was the most important kind of concepts in that research topic we were looking at? So, another way to think about this, maybe a more old-fashioned way, is when we ask students to do mind maps. We got them to put like a research question in the middle, and then we asked them to kind of consider what are the different elements of this question that are important, what are the elements that you're going to be researching. So, popping the question into Microsoft Copilot, for example, can be a really interesting way of kind of unpacking that research question further. It will break it down for the student. And as they start developing their search, particularly if they're using an academic database, they need to start considering, synonyms to add to the original search terms. So a synonym is, as you may know, a word that means the same thing. So for example, a word like well-being, you might instead look for a word like mental health. Or instead of university students, you might look up college students, for example. And what we teach students is when we're doing searches using academic databases, the idea is to get into the minds of scholars who've written about this topic before. We all come from different countries. I come from New Zealand. A lot of you are in Vietnam, we're in the UK, etc. All of these different countries have different terminology for the same sort of thing. Now, we don't want students to miss out on the wealth of information out there, so they're going to need to consider what are some other search terms that I might want to use if I want to capture all the research that's out there. And that can be really hard to do. Okay, so it can be really challenging for students to think of alternative terms to describe a topic, and that's where generative AI can assist with brainstorming those keywords. So I'm going to give you an example of that now and show you how that could work. So we could use something like Microsoft Copilot to support our search using the library catalog. So I'm going to stop sharing and use Copilot, and you're going to get a chance to use Copilot in a second as well. But let me just go to Copilot here. So if you remember, our original question was something like, how does well-being affect the academic performance of university students? Unpack this question or expand on this question. You could sort of ask it something like that. So you prompt it, and it has started to define key terms of the question, and it's kind of broken it down for me further. So this is a way, kind of an alternative to a mind map where the student can help better understand the question that they've been asked. They can obviously go back to Copilot and ask it in lots of different ways until they can understand, get a greater understanding of the topic. So if we then ask it, what are some alternative keywords I can use for well-being, academic performance, and university students? So this is saying these can help you broaden or refine your literature search, especially in academic databases. So they've given us synonyms again, so words that mean the same sort of thing or are related for well-being. So they've got mental health, psychological well-being, etc., etc. Academic performance, so they've got academic achievement, academic success, etc. Again, university students, they've given us some alternatives. Now, how can we use those if we're searching the library catalogue? Well, I'll show you now how a student might expand the original search that they did in order to make sure they're capturing more research with their search. So if we go back to the library search, so again, in the student portal, the student can click on library search and then digital resources and advanced search. So let's try some of those alternative keywords now. So if we go back to Copilot, so well-being, let's pick mental health. So well-being. Now you can see I've put or in capital letters. So this is how we're telling the database, we want you to search for literature that contains the word well-being or the words mental health. And for academic performance, let's go with academic achievement. And by the way, it doesn't matter what order I put these words into the data, into the kind of search bars. By the way, I could put well-being on the second line and it would make the same, it would do the same thing. So you can see again, I've put them in quote marks because we wanted to search for academic achievement as a phrase. And then the final one, university students, let's go with college students because that's more of an American terminology. So perhaps, you know, that might capture more American scholarship. Okay, so you can see now this is how we've expanded our search. So we've added these synonyms. And to be honest, you know, if a student was a postgraduate, you know, doing a dissertation, they might have more than one other keyword, but just this many is perfectly fine for our purposes and for undergraduate students. So we're going to click on search. And again, we have loads of results because this is quite a broad topic. We can filter it with that peer reviewed button and academic journals. But you can see that the purpose of this was to expand our results. So particularly if the student is studying something quite niche and they're not finding enough results, coming up with these synonyms can really affect the results that they're seeing. So you'll see there are lots of other different kinds of articles that are coming up now because we've included those synonyms. And that's where things like Copilot can really help the student to kind of understand the question and help them come up with other terms. Anybody got any questions about that? Okay, finally, what we're going to do is actually try to use Copilot and only Copilot, not the academic databases, to search for literature. Okay, so I wanted to show you the traditional way first using library search, so you could have a look at the kinds of results in library search and compare them with the kinds of results that you'd receive in Microsoft Copilot, Perplexity, ChatGPT, whatever tool you happen to be using. So I'm going to just type a prompt into the chat. And whatever tool you're using, could you put this prompt into that tool and see, let's have a look at the kinds of results that you get. So I'm going to put find studies looking at how well-being affects university students' academic performance. Now, as you probably will have heard earlier, it is about the quality of your prompt. Okay, so if you put in a really basic prompt, you're going to get very general results. The prompt I've used here isn't super like detailed. However, it is telling the generative AI tool that we want to find studies. Okay, so we're not looking for blog posts, we're looking for research. So if you could just copy that prompt and put it into whatever tool you're using, and then perhaps you could let me know in the chat, what kind of results are you seeing? Are they academic articles? If they are, which journals are they coming from? So follow the little link to the source and have a look at where it's coming from. And I'm going to do the same on my screen now. So I'm going to, again, stop sharing and open up my own Copilot and have a look at what kind of results we get if we put those prompts in. Okay, so I'm in Copilot and I'm going to put in the prompt, find studies looking at how well-being affects university students' academic performance, and click go. When you start to see some results, put them into the chat so that we can all see what sort of articles and material you're seeing. So you can see in Copilot anyway, there's a little sort of like footnote number that you can click on, which will take you to the original source where Copilot took that information from. This is what we want to encourage students to do. So you might notice if you're looking at my screen that some of the options here that they've given me, so for example, this study, when I click on the link, it takes me to a journal article from Springer Nature. And because I'm already logged into the University of Greenwich portal when I was showing you library search, it actually is going to provide me with full access because it's a subscribed resource. Now, obviously, if I wasn't a student or a staff member at Greenwich, if I was just the general public, I wouldn't be able to access it because this is a subscribed resource. So it's quite interesting how they can use both the university subscribed resources and Copilot. They kind of work together these days. But other articles that have it's recommended me are open access. So these are actually available to the general public. So if you Googled it, you'd be able to find it as well. So it's just kind of interesting to see what sort of results the AI tools are sharing. Let me have a look. Has anybody, so Laura has found basically, I think, the same articles that I have from what I can tell. Has anybody else found anything in using the tool of their choice?
I think the first one of mine is different to your one, Melissa.
So I've got that meta-analysis one, longitudinal study, study wellbeing. Okay, yes, I think. Let me have a look at my first one.
Yeah, which is where it's interesting, right? Because that's the thing with Gen AI. Whereas if we'd done that in the same library database, we would have got the exact same results. But it is different, even though we're both using Copilot.
That's right, and we put the same prompt in. So that's my first result. Anybody else had any success with finding anything using that prompt? I'll just give you about a minute or so more to explore with that, and let me know if you're having any issues with accessing any of the AI tools, and we can go through accessing Copilot again if you want. If you have done that first prompt and you'd like to try the second bit, modify the prompt, so add some more context or change some words, and just have a look to see how this changes your results. So again, I think you have done a session on using AI, generative AI, and it really is about the quality of your prompt as to the quality of the results that you will see. Okay, so Tim's got examining the effects of academic stress on student higher well-being and higher education. Did either of us get that? Examining the effects. Interesting. Yeah. Okay. So that's a brand new one. I don't think either Laura or I had. Anybody else? I mean, hopefully you can see that it's not, you know, like that you can get some good, high quality academic articles using generative AI. It's not just, you know, kind of picking up blog posts and, you know, rubbish. It is actually looking for academic studies, and particularly if your prompt says look for academic studies, it will do that. But I think the thing that's interesting to note is that, you know, you're not maybe getting the broad range that you get if you look at a library catalogue, because it is often just getting the stuff that's freely available that anyone could access. So you're not necessarily getting the full breadth of research that you would if you were using a library catalogue. I mean, what I would tend to recommend is to do both. If students want to start using something like Microsoft Copilot or ChatGPT and then move to the library databases, I think that could be quite useful. Okay, so Tim's got another one, relationships between mental well-being and academic performance in university students, systematic review. Yeah, great. Okay, and someone else has got study well-being profiles and academic performance, longitudinal effects. Okay, yeah, so some of those articles I found as well, actually. But yeah, you can see that everybody's getting quite a range, a mixture of articles. And how does the student know what the quality of the journal is that these articles are coming from? They may be high quality journals, but they're not coming necessarily from the library. So they need to maybe have a look deeper into what this journal is and whether it's a good quality journal. Okay, I'm going to move on from that now. Hopefully you've all had a bit of a chance to experiment with searching for academic research on a topic. This is a suggested exercise to give to students. This is something that I've done with students myself. So basically, I would do similar to what we did today. I would get students to practice the traditional way of keyword searching on a topic, using library search or, you know, a specific database, get them to have a look at the kind of results, you know, get them in the kind of, get them to practice doing that sort of searching. And then either you prepare a prompt or get them to prepare a prompt on that exactly the same topic, and use the AI tool of their choice, or use Microsoft Copilot with their Greenwich login. And then students should compare and evaluate the results from both types of searches. Once they've done that, you can then sort of develop the activity further so that you can discuss different things to do with information, the information environment. So if you want them to understand the differences between academic and non-academic sources, if you want to talk about, you know, what peer review is, or the value of different types of sources with different types of research question, you know, that idea of not just picking the first thing that you see, but actually thinking about the question that's being asked, what is an appropriate source to use. This kind of activity can lead to those sorts of discussions as they compare the results of the library catalogue with the generative AI results. And then this is when you can start suggesting frameworks or, you know, kind of questions that the student can have in mind when they're evaluating sources online. So if they are planning to use ChatGPT or even Google or something like that, they will need to be have their evaluative, their critical faculties on, let's say, because they'll need to make sure that what they're using is appropriate for their assignments. And I've linked to a few different evaluative frameworks which librarians sometimes use. So you might have heard of the CRAP test, which you can recommend to students. There's BREAD, ACT UP. These are all generally the same. I'm going to click on one of them, BREAD, so that you can see. Sorry, I'll have to stop sharing and share my screen. so you can see what it is. So the BREAD evaluative framework essentially asks the student to look at the material they found online and consider whether it has bias or what that bias is, whether it's relevant to the question that they've been asked, so that's the R. The E is evidence. What kind of evidence does that article kind of produce to back up its claims? A is for author, so who wrote that particular article? Do they have, are they knowledgeable? Are they, reputable in their field? And the date, so this is more like, is the information current? Is it old? Depending on the subject that you're teaching, it may be really important that students are finding information that is only from the last 5 years, etc. So these are the sorts of frameworks that we often recommend students to use when they're looking at stuff from AI or from Google, just to make sure that what they're using is actually good quality. Let me just go back to my slides. So BREAD was one evaluative framework. CRAP stands for currency, relevance, authority. I can't remember what the other A is. Do you remember, Laura? No, I might have to click on it to find out. But what I'm trying to get across is that there are other frameworks that you can utilize, and it just kind of gets students in the mindset of like not just accepting everything they see online, but actually kind of coming up with a way of deciding whether or not they should use that in their assignments. And you might have your own frameworks that you use, but I often find doing an exercise like this is a good way to kind of get into talking about evaluation of information. Does anybody have any questions? We're going to move on to the last part of the session now. So A for accuracy, thank you. Yes. Does anybody have anything that they wanted to talk about in regards to generative AI and its use for literature searching, or if they have their own evaluative frameworks or ways of, testing information online they'd like to share?
I think for a lot of us as adults, we would probably do a lot of this instinctively. The sort of evaluation of anything that you are looking at, particularly as educators, we would do that when we're looking at stuff through generative AI. But I think it's really important what Melissa is saying, that we encourage students to do this in a bit more of a structured way, because they don't necessarily do that instinctually, and that it is not necessarily something that they are aware they should be doing or they really know how to do with their, not just their academic studies, but with anything that they are looking at Gen AI for in their normal lives as well. So it is really important, I think, that we don't assume that they know they should be doing that, and we do talk to them about how to do this in a slightly more structured or thoughtful way.
Yeah, that's right. So, okay, so basically that's the end of the segment on searching. I guess what I ultimately want to say is that I think both things should be used together. I think that generative AI can be really useful for searching for literature, but we're not yet ready to stop using the library catalogues, because there's a lot of information out there that generative AI still can't access because it's behind that paywall. The student still needs to log in to access that information. So that is what I would recommend, is to use both things together. Okay, so we're going to finish by talking about academic referencing. This is something that students worry about quite a lot. What I tend to tell them, though, is that once they've learned how to reference, that's not going to change year on year. It's a system that everybody does the same thing. So, we have a guide to help them learn how to reference. And obviously, you might all be using different referencing styles. In the Greenwich Business School, they use Harvard, but there might be other styles as well. But the guide that we send students to, regardless of what style they're using, is Cite Them Right Online. So this is something that the University of Greenwich subscribes to. It's not freely available online. And so if students are trying to work out how to actually reference, I would recommend sending them there. I'm going to show you where to find it online in a second, but essentially you can access it via the subject guide, like I showed you earlier, for the different subject areas, or there's a link on the portal called Online Databases and Academic Journals where they can access it from. I'll show you that in a minute. One thing that students get a bit confused about is that it's not a reference generator, so it won't actually make the reference for them. It is just a guide that they can use to look at the format. So some students will like to use an online reference generator. So some common ones that we see at Greenwich are Cite Them For Me, MyBib, or they might use a reference management tool like Zotero. That's okay if they want to use a freely available online reference generator, but whatever reference is created by that tool, they do need to check it against Cite Them Right, because Cite Them Right is our definitive guide for Greenwich. So I'll show you how to find that and how students can use that for referencing now. So we've got lots of windows opened up here. Let me just go back to the portal. So again, we're in this library section of the portal. And as I said, they can either access it from their separate subject guide or from this link, Online Databases and Academic Journals. And again. So one of the things that I always tell students who are using Harvard is that, you know, there are actually quite a lot of different versions of Harvard. So the University of Greenwich is using the Cite Them Right version of Harvard. That's why we always direct them to this guide. So C for Cite Them Right. And the link. And for most students, they'll need to log in. Because I'm on campus, it automatically logged me in, but they should log in up the top here. And then the way that they use this guide is they choose the referencing style. So let's, for example, choose Harvard. But you can see there's lots of different referencing styles available. And then whatever source the student is using, so whatever they're citing from, they can select that from the menu. So let's say, for example, a journal article. So they click on the link for journal articles. And Cite Them Right provides them with guidance for how they can do that reference. So both the in-text citation, it will show them the format, and the final reference at the end of their work. So you can see what I mean about this is not a reference generator. The student still needs to write the reference themselves, but they can use Cite Them Right to make sure that they've formatted it correctly. And Cite Them Right have a little section on the right-hand side here, which is actually editable. So if they want to practice, you can see I'm editing it here, they can practice with the source that they're quoting from. And as long as they keep all the formatting the same as it is here, so with the same speech marks, italics, etc., then they should be able to copy that and put that straight into their assignment. Now, if they want to use a different reference generator, you know, Cite Them For Me or Zotero, and it's created a reference, say in the Harvard style, they should check that reference against what Cite Them Right have listed here, because as I've said a few times already, this is the definitive guide for Greenwich. So if we just go back one, if they want to do APA, same thing. So let's pick a different kind of source. So some of these aren't that obvious. One of the stumbling blocks that students have is that they're not necessarily sure what it is they're referencing. Books and journals are usually obvious, but what about if it's, say, a financial database, for example? Where would they click? So for that one, it's under research, under reports, and then we have financial reports from online databases or terminal-based databases, say if they're using Bloomberg. Same if they were looking for law reports. So sometimes it's not super obvious to the student where they need to click to find the guidance, but the guidance will be there. So under digital and internet, for example, we have under software, generative AI. So if they are kind of chatting, let's say with ChatGPT, and for some reason want to use that chat in their assignment, they can do that, but they need to reference using ChatGPT. And Cite Them Right, again, will give them an example of how to do that, the in-text citation and the reference list. This is for APA. Any questions about Cite Them Right?
I've just put a link in the chat as well to the declaration. So just a reminder that obviously if students are using Gen AI in their research process, then that's absolutely fine, and the university is very happy with that, but they should be declaring that use in their assessment. So I've just put a link to the declaration form there in case you didn't have that and you want to share that with your students.
Yeah, because there is actually two parts, isn't there? So declaration of use. So for example, if they used it to search, unpack their topic, search for keywords, create structure of their assignment, but then also if they actually reference, if they utilize something that AI has said in their assignment, they need to reference it as well. So there's sort of two things that they need to do if they're actually directly using stuff from AI in their assignment. Okay, so the number one tip that I would have for referencing, if you're supporting students with this, is that they must note down all the sources they use. So referencing is really the way that they avoid plagiarizing. Okay, so that most students have heard of plagiarism, and most of them are quite worried about it. But if they reference correctly, then they don't need to worry about plagiarism. So one of the most common mistakes is they'll be finding lots of results, like maybe in the library catalogue or with ChatGPT, but they don't note down where they found those quotes, where they found that literature. So encourage them to develop their own system. So that may be just a simple Word document with links, or you could introduce them to reference management software. I mentioned Zotero earlier, or Mendeley. This is software that students can sign up for free. It's kind of like their own personal library, and it's where they can upload academic articles and other material that they use for their assignments, which will have all the citation information that they need for referencing. I won't go into detail about Zotero or Mendeley, but if you're interested, the link will be in the slides so you can have a look at our guide. But whatever system students use, the main thing is that they need to write down where their sources came from. So this is especially important if they are using generative AI for literature searching. They do need to follow that link to the source so they can take down the URL so they can reference it correctly. Does anybody have any questions or insights from their own practice about referencing, or students' concerns around referencing or plagiarism? No? Okay, well, we've come to the end of our session now. So just to kind of, thank you, Tim, just to kind of wrap up there, essentially the message that I've been trying to get across is that we should be encouraging students to use those academic resources. This is something they have access to as students and they should make the most of it. But we need to equip them with the tools that they need to search these, because most people don't know how. And so just to reiterate what Laura said, if you don't have the time or necessarily feel confident about teaching students how to do keyword searching, then the academic services librarians at Greenwich will be, well, I can't speak on behalf of my team, but I'm sure that it's true. We're very happy to help you. We can send you videos. I'm happy to come and do sessions. I know the time difference is something we need to think about, but I would be happy to support you with that. But we should be also encouraging the critical exploration of generative AI. It is a super useful tool to use in conjunction with the academic resources. And yeah, just a reminder that we do need to support students with referencing to encourage academic integrity. So thanks very much for participating in the session today. Does anybody have any last questions? You can either ask them here, or you can see my email address, m.steiner@greenwich.ac.uk. If you'd prefer to email me with a question, that's also fine, but I'm open to any questions now if you have any.
So while we're just waiting to see if there are any questions, I put a link to the feedback form in the chat. It's very quick. If anyone wants to fill that in, that's really useful for us just to look at the programme for next year so that we know what is helpful for you and what you enjoyed, and also where we can improve. So please do fill that in. That'll be really helpful for us. Tim, yes, we will send all of the slides around, and we will also share the recording from the session as well. As I said at the start, the recording is very easy to share if you have a Greenwich email address. So if you want it immediately, you can email me from your Greenwich email address and I can very quickly share that with you. Otherwise, we will have to make it available through YouTube, which tends to take us a little bit longer, unfortunately. But unfortunately, the Greenwich settings only allow us to share through SharePoint with Greenwich email addresses. That's something we have no control over. So I have put the feedback form there. We do have the rest of the programme this week, which will be happening. I have unfortunately just found out that we are going to have to cancel tomorrow's session as Emma is not feeling well. That was due to be inclusive and engaging teaching. So I will cancel the calendar invite in case anyone was planning to attend that, but I have just put the link to that in the chat, the link to the previous recording. So again, you will need to log in with your Greenwich email address to access that. And we will send the slides around for that as well. So we will be back on Thursday at 9:30 UK time. Again, so same time as today. And that will be Jimmy's session, which will be following on nicely from Melissa's session. Because we'll also be talking about generative AI in higher education, and it will be looking at critical perspectives and practical applications. So whereas Melissa was looking largely at how you can support your students with using this, Jimmy will be looking more at how you can use it in your own work as staff members. So that will hopefully follow on nicely from today's session. And then on Friday, we will be running a session about Studiosity, which is a new resource we are rolling out to all of our partners from September, which is a tool that students can use to get feedback on their academic writing. So we think that will be really useful for students. And if you haven't used it before, it would be really useful for you so that you can talk to your students about using it and how it will be helpful for them. So hopefully I will see you later in the week for the rest of the sessions. In the meantime, if there are no questions for Melissa, then I just want to say thank you very much, Melissa, for a great session. I think that was really useful and hopefully helped everyone to kind of understand a bit more about how we can support our students, how we can talk to them about using the library, using generative AI, and make sure that we are really transparent about that and encourage them to be honest and authentic about how they are using these tools within their academic journey. And as Melissa said, we are very happy for you to get in touch if you would like any further support on this. Melissa and the rest of the team are very happy to run online sessions live or to send you recorded videos if you do want a little bit more help about talking to your students with this. So please do get in touch. We'd be very happy to arrange that, and we already run some sessions like that for some partners. So we're very keen to expand that offer and make sure that your students are getting just as much support as the students at Greenwich. Okay, well, if there are no other questions, then thank you very much, everyone. We will let you go so that you can finish your days. And I hope to see some of you later in the week. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.